Why is private equity suddenly so interested in healthcare? And why are they so destructive? In this video, I'll use my value-based care simulation model to show you the math behind why private equity is investing so heavily in accountable care organizations that participate in value-based care and how they profit from it. And if you've not played with my simulation model yet, I'd strongly encourage you to go to vbcsim.pcplens.com and play with it so that you can see the math for yourself. Well, let's dive in. So once you log in to vbcsim.pcplens.com, this is the website that you're going to see. And like what I did in my previous videos, I'm going to do the exact same thing, that I'm just going to end up following the realistic scenario in this case. So when we're setting up a network, we have approximately 100 PCPs, 1,000 patients per PCP, and the attribution rate is about 80%. The total cost of care is approximately $10,000, target savings approximately 5%, and a minimum savings rate of 1.5%. And the ACO is going to get approximately 50% of gain share. Everything else pretty much remains the same, so we're actually going to move on to the next step, which is the opportunity. So this is the pot of gold in which you have approximately 80,000 attributed patients. Since the total cost of care per patient is $10,000, the total cost of care for all patients in the ACO is approximately $800 million. 5% of $800 million is $40 million, which is what the ACO is targeting that they want to save. And if they do end up saving $40 million, the ACO is going to get approximately $20 million from that, which is the 50% of that $40 million. So that's the opportunity that the ACO can receive if they end up saving money by decreasing the total cost of care. And then the physicians themselves in the ACO, the primary care physicians, since there are 100 primary care physicians, they have the opportunity to earn approximately $200,000 if they do end up helping to reduce the total cost of care. So that's a pot of gold. Let's take a look at the next step, which is pretty much our infrastructure costs. The infrastructure costs, I'm just going to go down. The total infrastructure cost that we model is approximately $2.1 million, and the per PCP burden is approximately $57,000 to $58,000, which is because of all the administrative overhead that the PCPs have to deal with, which is non-billable. Now, performance year is approximately 1 year, which starts from January to December, but it takes approximately another 6 months for reconciliation to happen. So by the time the reconciliation happens and the decision is made whether the check should be distributed to the ACO or not, it's approximately 18 months since the investment had to be made. So really what we're talking about is the 18-month ACO funding ends up being approximately $3.1 million. And by this time, all the PCPs have burned approximately $86,000, or they've lost in opportunity cost. So there's a lot of money that's on the table. And so this is why we need a funder, because we need somebody to fund this $3.1 million. With that, now let's take a look at private equity as our funder. So we scroll down and we select private equity. Now, just like any other company, private equity is not going to come in and just give the money for free to an ACO. They're going to want something in return. And the most obvious thing is gain share, a percentage of gain share. So in our case, the ACO was supposed to receive $20 million if they saved or reduced the total cost of care by approximately 5%. The private equity company is going to want a percentage of that. And in this case, we modeled it out as 50%. So they will want $10 million of the gain share. But what they also want is, because they're investing this money, they want to ensure that the ACO is set up for success. And success in PE company means that they get some gain share. So once they get control of the board, they end up prioritizing those tasks that will increase gain share, such as increasing the risk adjustment factor and HCC coding, over helping patients to actually decrease the total cost of care. What this also means is they're going to push more and more administrative burden down onto the physicians, primary care physicians, so that their administrative overhead increases, because all they care about is the money or the gain share that they're going to receive. And they also have a couple of other levers up their sleeve. The other big one is that they end up dividing the ACO network into high-performing physicians and low-performing physicians. So the low performing physicians are generally the ones who have patients who have a high total cost of care, or their quality measurement targets, they're not able to achieve their quality measurement targets. And I've talked about in the past where really these are not good doctors or bad doctors. A lot of this is related to socioeconomic issues. Physicians who take care of people who have more socioeconomic problems, they tend to have, these patients tend to have higher utilization, and also it's harder for them to hit the quality measures for various socioeconomic reasons. So really, they're dividing this into two different groups, and the higher performing group, they end up putting them into more lucrative high risk contracts which have a much higher upside risk. And then the physicians who are not performing as well because of their patient panels, they get put into the only what's called an upside risk contract. So in case that they don't hit their targets, the private equity company does not lose money. So this is another way that they kind of divvy up the network to ensure that there is at least some gain share coming in, even if it is coming in through some of the doctors in the ACO, not all of the doctors. And there's one more thing which a lot of people don't realize. An ACO is a clinically integrated network, which means that they can bring more and more other types of physicians into that network. And since they are going to the payers and they're negotiating contracts, they will negotiate not only the value-based care contract, but they will also negotiate the fee-for-service contract, especially the commercial fee-for-service contracts. And because they start increasing or consolidating and making the network larger and larger, they tend to negotiate higher fee-for-service contracts with the payers, increasing the total cost of care in the commercial market. So these are just some of the levers that they can pull. With that, let's take a look at what happens when private equity or when the ACO either succeeds or they don't succeed. What happens to the private equity company in those cases? So let's take a look at the outcomes. And the first outcome we are going to take a look is when the ACO actually hits their target. So the ACO hit their target, they say $40 million. The payer share in this case is $20 million, and the ACO ends up receiving another $20 million. Of this $20 million, the ACO keeps some money for operations for the following year, and they also keep some reserves in case they actually don't end up hitting the target next year, which ends up leaving approximately $15.9 million to be distributed. Now, the private equity company is going to take 50% of this money that is going to be distributed, which means that they end up taking approximately $8 million, and the other $8 million is left over to distribute to the other 100 physicians, which means every individual physician is going to get approximately $80,000, which on the surface sounds like a lot of money. But let's see what happens. Remember, the PCPs themselves were approximately $86,000 already under the hole in terms of opportunity cost because of the administrative burden. They couldn't see patients which could have generated revenue because they were involved in doing all of the administrative work that was pushed down on them under value-based care. So in spite of receiving $80,000, they're still under the hole. They still lost approximately $7,000 in this case. So the PE made money, the ACO kept money, but the physicians, they still ended up losing money. Now let's take a look at what happens if the ACO actually ends up losing money. So obviously in this case, the savings is going to be $0, and the primary care physicians ended up losing approximately $86,000. So what happened to the private equity company? They still have levers that they used in order to make some money. So remember, we already talked about that if they went in and negotiated a high fee-for-service contract under the commercial contracts, they skimmed a portion of that, right? So they made some money from that. They also charged a management fee, right? So they made some money from the management fee. The other thing that they could have done, and they generally do, is called dividend recapitalization. What this means is that the private equity company goes to the bank and takes out a huge loan showing the potential profit if the ACO ends up succeeding. So in this case, they'll go to a bank and say like, hey bank, this ACO, if they succeed, they're going to make $20 million. So why don't you give me a loan of $3 or $4 million against this future profit that the ACO is going to get. And then when they get this loan from the bank, they take the entire money as a special dividend. So even before the performance year has started, the money that the private equity company invested in the ACO, they already took that out by taking a loan and saddling that loan on the ACO. So the ACO is now saddled with debt. The private equity company already took the money out even before it started. So I hope that makes sense. What this essentially does is that the private equity company has shielded itself from any loss. If the ACO wins, they win. If the ACO loses, they still end up making some money. Just like a gambling house, the house always wins. Now let's take a look and model this out for the next several years and see what happens to the private equity company, to the ACO, and to the physicians. So we're going to keep all the benchmarks exactly the same. And as we've discussed in the past, most ACOs end up failing within a decade. But let's take a look at what happens. The total net to PCP is approximately $27.8 million, which is a lot of money. But if you count the opportunity cost, they actually end up losing approximately $37,000 on average per year. So first of all, that's a big problem. But let's take a look at what happens to private equity. So in the PE share, you can see every single year, the private equity company is taking 50% of the gain share. Now remember, the initial investment was approximately $3.1 million, but they're taking gain share for every single subsequent year. And if you add all of this up, this ends up being about $28 million. They invested $3 million, and over the course of 6 years, they got approximately $28 million. That's almost 900% return on investment. And that is not counting the management fees, the dividend recapitalization, skimming on top of the commercial fee-for-service rates. And if you add all of that up, they probably have like 1,000% return on investment. This is the reason why private equity is so interested in funding ACOs. And they're not just funding one ACO, right? It's a high risk, high reward. So they're funding multiple ACOs. So even if some ACOs don't make a lot of money, there are other ACOs that they're really minting money. This is the reason why value-based care and private equity company, they are a match made in Washington, D.C. Many of you probably already know that primary care is a loss leader model. That is, large organizations use primary care to get patients in the door and then funnel them into more expensive services such as specialist visits, downstream labs, radiology, procedures, or expensive surgeries. ACOs in value-based care contracts, especially independent ACOs, are in the exact same boat, but at a much larger scale. Because these ACOs need upfront capital to survive, whoever is going to provide that capital is going to be looking for a return on investment. And we talked about the different types of funders in my last few videos and even today. So we looked at taking a bank loan, we looked at if the hospital comes in to fund, if the payers themselves decide to fund, and today if private equity. But essentially what ends up happening is in every single one of these models, because there's so much money upfront capital that's required, people end up having to take shortcuts because if you don't, the ACO is going to go bankrupt. And even with all of that, most ACOs do end up going bankrupt within a decade. So the way to survive this is really scale. You need to become larger and larger and larger, which is consolidation. And once you get consolidated, yes, you might make some money in value-based care, but the other aspect of this is with consolidation, these ACOs or these clinically integrated networks, because now they've built up a contracting arm, they can go up to the insurance companies and negotiate higher fee-for-service contracts and increase the total cost of care in the commercial population. This is the reason why value-based care does not save money. I know it's paradoxical. Everybody thinks value-based care is going to save money because, God forbid, in fee-for-service, if you pay doctors to see patients, then they're going to want to see patients more and more. But in value-based care, all of these incentives, yes, they're not in front of the physician themselves, but they have been abstracted away at a more complicated layer where it is much more damaging. So paradoxically, value-based care does not save money. It actually ends up increasing the total cost of care. I hope that made sense. With that, take care and goodbye.